My family destroyed my college scholarship, so their golden child brother wouldn't look like a failure. So I destroyed their lives. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are, 20 years later, and I'm still processing what my own family did to me, what I did to them in return. Some people might think I went too far. Others will say they had it coming. I'll let you be the judge. This all started when I was 17, a senior in high school, with dreams bigger than my small town could contain. But to understand why what happened was so devastating, you need to know about my family dynamics first. I grew up in one of those picture-perfect suburban families that looked great from the outside. Dad was the high school principal. Mom taught third grade, and we lived in this neat little house with a white picket fence. But inside, everything revolved around my older brother Jake. Jake was 2 years older than me, and from the day I was born, it was clear who the favorite was. Jake was the athlete, the charming one, the son who would carry on the family name. Me? I was just the smart one. And in my family, being smart was nice, but it wasn't special. Every dinner conversation was about Jake's latest football game or basketball tournament. When Jake brought home a C+ in chemistry, Dad would pat him on the back and say, "That's my boy, working hard." When I brought home straight A's, Mom would barely look up from her grading and say, "That's nice, honey. Did you see Jake scored 3 touchdowns last Friday?" The double standards were insane. Jake could stay out until midnight without consequences, but I had to be home by 9. Jake got a brand new car for his 16th birthday, a red Mustang that he promptly crashed into a mailbox. What did I get for my 16th? A lecture about responsibility and a maybe next year when I asked about driver's ed? But the worst part wasn't even the favoritism. It was how they expected me to be grateful for the scraps of attention I got. Like when Jake failed his SATs the first time, and suddenly Mom was interested in my perfect score. Not to celebrate me, but to ask if I could tutor Jake. Of course, I said yes. What else was I supposed to do? I spent my entire high school career living in Jake's shadow, but I had a plan. I was going to get into a top college, preferably somewhere far away, and prove that I was worth something. I studied like my life depended on it, which honestly, it did. My GPA was 4.3, I was valedictorian, president of 3 clubs, and I had volunteer hours that would make a saint jealous. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, used to joke that colleges would be fighting over me. "Sarah," she'd say, "you're the kind of student scholarship committees dream about. You're going to have your pick of schools." That's when I learned about the Morrison Academic Excellence Scholarship. It was this incredible full-ride scholarship to State University, covering tuition, room, board, books, everything. The Morrison family had established it 50 years ago, and they only gave out one per year to a student from our county. One. State University wasn't Harvard, but it had an excellent business program, and more importantly, it was 4 hours away from my family. Far enough to breathe, close enough to visit if I wanted to. The scholarship was awarded based on academic achievement, leadership, and a comprehensive interview process. It was competitive. Kids from 6 different high schools in the county could apply. I knew I had a real shot. My stats were better than anyone else's I knew, and Mrs. Patterson had been working with me on my application for months. We crafted essays that told my story, not the part about my family dynamics because that felt too personal, but about my academic journey, my leadership experience, and my plans for the future. The application was due March 15th of senior year. I remember that date like it's tattooed on my brain. I had everything ready 2 weeks early, checked and double-checked every form, every essay, every letter of recommendation. Mrs. Patterson submitted it electronically, and I mailed a hard copy as backup just to be safe. Then we waited. The selection process took about 6 weeks. First, they'd narrow down the applicants to the top 10 based on academic credentials. Then those 10 would be invited for interviews in late April. The winner would be announced May 1st, which was perfect timing for college decision deadlines. While I was waiting, something weird started happening at home. My parents, who had never shown much interest in my academic achievements, suddenly became very concerned about my college plans. "You know, Sarah," Dad said one evening while I was doing homework at the kitchen table, "you should really consider staying local for college. State University is nice, but there are plenty of good schools right here." "I am considering state," I said, not looking up from my calculus. "If I get the Morrison Scholarship." Dad and Mom exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. "Well," Mom said carefully, "you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. What if you don't get it? Then I'll figure something else out. But Mrs. Patterson thinks I have a really good chance." Another look between my parents. "Mrs. Patterson might be a little optimistic," Dad said. "The Morrison Scholarship is very competitive. Students from all over the county apply." I finally looked up. I know that, but I have the highest GPA in the county, perfect test scores, and more leadership experience than anyone. Why wouldn't I have a chance? Oh, honey, Mom said in that tone she used when she thought I was being naive. Sometimes it's not just about grades. These things are political. The Morrison family has certain preferences. I had no idea what she meant by that. And honestly, I didn't care. I knew I was qualified, and I was confident in my application. What I didn't know was what my parents were planning behind my back. April came and went. By the last week of the month, I should have heard something about interviews. Mrs. Patterson was starting to seem worried, making phone calls to the scholarship office and getting vague responses about processing and reviewing applications. May 1st arrived. No phone call, no letter, nothing. I was devastated, but I tried to be rational about it. Maybe the competition really was that tough. Maybe someone else had even better qualifications. Maybe my parents were right, and I had been too optimistic. That's when Jake came home with news that changed everything. Guess what? He announced at dinner that night, grinning like he'd won the lottery. I got the Morrison Scholarship. The fork slipped out of my hand and clattered onto my plate. What? The Morrison Scholarship. You know, the full ride to State University? They called this afternoon. I stared at him, then at my parents, who were beaming like proud peacocks. That's impossible, I said quietly. Why is that impossible? Dad asked, his voice getting that dangerous edge it got when he thought I was disrespecting Jake. Because Jake didn't apply for it. His GPA is 2.8. You need at least a 3.5 just to be eligible. Shows what you know, Jake said smugly. I did apply. Dad helped me with the application back in March. And apparently, they were looking for someone with well-rounded experience, not just book smarts. I felt like I was in the twilight zone. Jake, you failed 3 classes last semester. You've never been in a single club or organization. You've never volunteered for anything in your life. That's enough, Sarah, Mom said sharply. Just because you didn't get the scholarship doesn't mean you should take it out on your brother. Jake has plenty of qualities that colleges value. Name one, I snapped. He's a natural leader, Dad said. Captain of the football team, popular with his peers, well-liked by teachers. That counts for a lot more than you might think. I excused myself from dinner and went straight to my room, where I called Mrs. Patterson at home. She sounded as confused as I felt. Sarah, that can't be right, she said. I've been in contact with the scholarship committee. They never received an application from Jake. And besides, even if they had, he doesn't meet the minimum requirements. Then how did he get it? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Can you come to my office first thing tomorrow morning? That night was the longest of my life. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. Jake couldn't have legitimately won a scholarship he wasn't qualified for, but he seemed genuinely excited, and my parents were treating it like it was real. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson and I called the Morrison Scholarship office together. The woman on the phone confirmed that Jake Matthews had indeed been awarded the scholarship, but when we asked about my application, things got weird. I'm sorry, the administrator said, but we don't have any record of an application from Sarah Matthews. That's impossible, Mrs. Patterson said. I submitted it myself, both electronically and by mail. Let me double check. No, I'm not seeing anything. Are you sure the application was completed correctly? Sometimes, if all the materials aren't received by the deadline, the application isn't processed. We went around in circles for 20 minutes, but the story didn't change. According to their records, I had never applied for the scholarship, and Jake had not only applied but had been the standout candidate. That's when Mrs. Patterson asked the question that changed everything. Can you tell me when Jake's application was submitted? There was a pause, then typing. March 17th, submitted by, let me see, Principal David Matthews. My dad. My dad had submitted Jake's application 2 days after the deadline, using his position as principal to get it accepted late. And somehow, my application had disappeared entirely. Mrs. Patterson's face went white. Sarah, I think you need to go home and have a serious conversation with your parents. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. None of them good. I found Mom in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, drinking coffee and looking unusually nervous. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. What happened to my Morrison Scholarship application? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Mom, honey, sit down. Let me explain. Just tell me what happened to my application. She sighed deeply. Your father and I, we thought it was better this way. Jake needs this scholarship more than you do. He needs it more? My voice was rising. He has a 2.8 GPA. He's barely graduating. That's exactly why he needs it. You're smart, Sarah. You can get scholarships anywhere. Jake, this might be his only chance at college. So you sabotaged mine? We didn't sabotage anything. We just redirected it. Your father knew someone on the selection committee. He was able to make sure Jake's application got special consideration. I couldn't breathe. Where is my application? Sarah, where is my application, Mom? She got up and walked to the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one where we kept batteries and twist ties and other random stuff. She pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. It was my Morrison scholarship application. Complete, perfect, and never mailed. You stole it, I whispered. We borrowed it. We used it as a template for Jake's application. Your essays were so good we thought, you gave Jake my essays? We adapted them, changed them to fit his experiences. I opened the envelope and pulled out my application. All those weeks of work, all those carefully crafted essays about my goals and dreams and achievements. And they had stolen it and given it to Jake. How could you do this to me? We did it for the family, Sarah. Jake is struggling. You're going to be fine no matter what. But Jake, if he doesn't get into college, what's he going to do? We couldn't let him fail. So you made me fail instead. You're not failing. You can still go to college, just maybe not State University. Mom, State University was my dream school, and that scholarship was worth $40,000 a year. How am I supposed to pay for college now? Student loans like everyone else. Your father and I will help as much as we can. You'll help? You just stole my future and gave it to Jake. That's when Dad walked in, still in his work clothes. What's all the yelling about? She found out, Mom said quietly. Dad looked at me, then at the application in my hands. Sarah, I know you're upset, but you need to understand. No. I stood up. No, I don't need to understand anything. You committed fraud. You stole my scholarship application and forged one for Jake. That's a crime. Now wait just a minute. You used your position as principal to get his application accepted late. You gave him my essays. You probably used my test scores too, didn't you? The look on his face told me I was right. You submitted my SAT scores under Jake's name. Jesus Christ, Dad, do you realize how illegal this is? Keep your voice down, he hissed. The neighbors don't need to hear this. I don't care about the neighbors. I care about the fact that my own parents destroyed my future to help your precious golden child. Jake is not our golden child, Mom said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Really? Name one time, one single time, when you chose me over Jake. One time when my achievements mattered more than his feelings. Silence. That's what I thought. I spent the rest of senior year in a haze of anger and disappointment. My friends were all excitedly planning for college, and I was scrambling to find alternatives. I managed to get into a decent state school with a partial scholarship, but it meant taking out massive student loans and working part-time throughout college. Jake went to State University in the fall, acting like he'd earned his spot fair and square. My parents threw him a going-away party, bought him new clothes and a laptop, and drove him to campus like proud parents, sending their successful son off to pursue his dreams. They offered to drive me to my school too, but I declined. I'd already started pulling away from them, and frankly, I couldn't stomach another display of their twisted priorities. College was hard, really hard. Not academically, I could handle the coursework easily. But financially, it was a nightmare. I worked 20 hours a week at a campus cafe, took extra shifts during breaks, and still had to take out more loans every semester. I ate ramen noodles and generic mac and cheese, wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, and couldn't afford to go home for holidays because I needed to work. Meanwhile, Jake was living it up at State University on my scholarship, or trying to anyway. I found out later from a mutual friend that Jake was struggling academically from day one. He'd placed into remedial math and English, and even with tutoring, he was barely passing his classes. He changed majors 3 times in 2 years, trying to find something easy enough for him to handle. But here's the thing. I didn't know any of this at the time. All I knew was what my parents told me during our increasingly rare phone calls, which was that Jake was doing great and really finding himself in college. I graduated with a business degree in 4 years, summa cum laude, with honors from the business school and a pile of debt that felt like a mortgage. I'd been working internships throughout college, so I had some experience, and I managed to land a decent job at a consulting firm right after graduation. The next few years were a blur of 70-hour work weeks, tiny apartments, and slowly paying down my student loans. I threw myself into my career with the same intensity I'd once put into high school academics. I was going to prove that I could succeed without my family's help, that their betrayal hadn't broken me. And you know what? It worked. I was good at my job. Really good. I understood business strategy instinctively, could analyze complex problems, and come up with creative solutions. Within 3 years, I was promoted to senior consultant. Within 5 years, I was the youngest principal in the firm's history. I still didn't talk to my family much. We exchanged cards at holidays and made awkward small talk during brief phone calls. But that was it. I'd built a life for myself that didn't include them, and honestly, I was happier that way. Or I thought I was, until I got the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in October, about 15 years after the scholarship incident. I was in my corner office. Yes, I had a corner office by then, reviewing a client proposal when my assistant knocked on my door. Sarah, there's a Mrs. Patterson on the phone for you. She says she was your high school guidance counselor? Mrs. Patterson. I hadn't thought about her in years, but she'd been one of the few adults who'd really supported me during that awful time. I picked up the phone. Mrs. Patterson? Sarah. Oh my goodness, it's so good to hear your voice. I've been following your career, you know. The local paper did an article about successful alumni a few years ago, and you were featured. I'm so proud of you. Thank you. That's very kind. How are you? Are you still at the high school? Actually, no. I retired 5 years ago. But that's part of why I'm calling. I've been asked to serve on the Morrison Scholarship Selection Committee. My heart stopped. The Morrison Scholarship. I hadn't thought about it in years, but suddenly it all came rushing back. The betrayal, the stolen application, the way my parents had destroyed my future to help Jake. Sarah? Are you still there? Yes, sorry. The Morrison Scholarship, wow. That brings back memories. I'm sure it does. And that's actually why I'm calling. The committee is looking for additional members, people who understand what it's like to work hard for success. Your name came up as a potential candidate. You're exactly the kind of accomplished alumna they want involved. My name came up? Well, I may have suggested it. Sarah, I've never forgotten what happened to you with that scholarship. It was wrong then, and it's still wrong now. I think it would be fitting for you to be involved in making sure deserving students get the opportunities they've earned. I was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was asking. The Morrison Scholarship Committee, the scholarship that should have been mine, that had been stolen from me and given to Jake. What would it involve? We meet twice a year, once in the fall to review applications and narrow down the candidates, and once in the spring for final interviews and selection. It's volunteer work, of course, but it's incredibly rewarding. And Sarah, you'd have access to all the historical records, including past recipients and their outcomes. Something in her tone suggested she knew exactly what she was offering me. I'd be interested, I said. When do you need an answer? The next meeting is in 3 weeks. I can put your name forward if you'd like. Yes, please do. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out the window, my mind racing. The Morrison Scholarship Committee. After all these years, I was going to be on the inside of the organization that had been the center of my family's betrayal. And I was going to have access to all the records. 3 weeks later, I drove back to my hometown for the first time in over 5 years. Not much had changed. Same small town feel, same familiar buildings, same sense of being too small for my ambitions. But I was different. I wasn't the desperate, betrayed teenager who'd left with nothing but debt and determination. I was a successful businesswoman with influence and resources. The committee meeting was held at the Morrison Families Foundation offices, a beautiful historic building downtown. There were 8 of us total. Mrs. Patterson, myself, 3 local business leaders, a retired teacher, a bank president, and Dr. Morrison himself, the grandson of the scholarship's founder. Dr. Morrison was probably in his 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and kind eyes. He welcomed me personally and thanked me for volunteering my time. We're always looking for accomplished young alumni to join our committee, he said. Mrs. Patterson speaks very highly of you, and your career achievements are impressive. We're lucky to have you. The meeting started with an overview of the current applicant pool. 23 students from across the county, all with excellent credentials. We spent 3 hours reviewing applications, and I was struck by how qualified these kids were. Much more qualified than Jake had been when he somehow won the scholarship. After the formal meeting, Mrs. Patterson took me aside. Sarah, I want to show you something. She led me to a small office where the foundation kept their historical records. As a committee member, you have access to all past recipient files. I thought you might be interested in reviewing some of them. She pulled out a thick file folder labeled Recipients 2000 to 2010 and set it on the desk in front of me. Take your time, she said. I'll be in the main conference room when you're ready. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened the folder. I flipped through the files chronologically until I found what I was looking for. 2006, Jake Matthews. I opened Jake's file, and immediately something was wrong. The application wasn't in Jake's handwriting. It was in mine. Not just the essays, but the entire application. Someone had literally photocopied my original application and whited out my name, replacing it with Jake's. They'd used my grades, my test scores, my extracurricular activities, my volunteer work, everything. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was the follow-up documentation. Every Morrison Scholarship recipient was required to submit annual progress reports, transcripts, proof of enrollment, information about their academic and career progress. The foundation tracked their scholars carefully, partly to maintain relationships for future fundraising, and partly to ensure the money was being well spent. According to Jake's file, he had submitted progress reports for his first 2 years at State University. His grades were mediocre, mostly C's with a few B's and D's, but he was maintaining the minimum GPA required to keep the scholarship. But then, in his 3rd year, the report stopped. There was a note in the file from the foundation administrator. No response to multiple requests for progress report. Student appears to have withdrawn from university. Attempted to contact family. Parents report student taking a break, but will return to complete degree. The next entry was a year later. Still no contact from recipient. Parents now claim student has transferred to another institution, but unable to provide documentation. Scholarship officially terminated due to non-compliance with reporting requirements. The final entry was from 2 years after that. Parents continue to claim student graduated from State University with business degree. University registrar confirms no such graduation record exists. I read that last line 3 times before it sank in. Jake had never graduated from college. He dropped out in his 3rd year and never gone back. But according to my parents, he was a college graduate working in business. They'd been lying about it for over a decade. My mind raced back through the few conversations I'd had with my family over the years. Every Christmas card, every brief phone call, they'd mention Jake's successful career and how proud they were of their college graduate son. They'd been lying this entire time. I took pictures of every page in Jake's file with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from adrenaline rather than nerves. I had proof. After all these years, I finally had proof of what they'd done. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to know more about what Jake had been doing all these years if he wasn't the successful college graduate they claimed he was. That night, I did what any rational person in 2021 would do. I started stalking my brother on social media. It didn't take long to find him. Jake wasn't particularly careful about his privacy settings, and his Facebook profile was a goldmine of information. According to his profile, he worked as a business development manager at something called Matthews Consulting Solutions. I'd never heard of Matthews Consulting Solutions, so I looked it up. The company had a basic website with stock photos and vague descriptions of business strategy services and organizational development. The address listed was a P.O. box. It was a fake company. Jake was running some kind of scam, using his supposed college degree to convince people he was qualified to provide business consulting services. I dug deeper. Jake's LinkedIn profile claimed he had a bachelor's degree in business administration from State University and 15 years of experience in strategic consulting and business development. His work history was creative fiction, companies that didn't exist, positions that were deliberately vague, achievements that couldn't be verified. But the most interesting thing was his recent activity. Jake had been posting regularly about landing new clients and expanding his business. He was clearly making decent money because his personal Facebook showed pictures of a nice house, a new car, and expensive vacations, all based on a college degree he'd never earned. That's when I realized I had more than just proof of the original scholarship fraud. I had proof of ongoing fraud that was happening right now. Jake was misrepresenting his credentials to clients, using a fake degree to sell services he wasn't qualified to provide. And in the business world, that's not just unethical, it's illegal. I spent the next few weeks quietly investigating Jake's business activities. Using my professional network and resources, I was able to identify several of his current clients. They were small business owners mostly, the kind of people who might hire a consultant to help them grow their companies, but wouldn't necessarily verify credentials thoroughly. I also did some research into the legal implications of degree fraud. Depending on the state and the specific circumstances, it could be charged as wire fraud, mail fraud, or general fraud, with potential penalties including fines and prison time. But I wasn't ready to make any moves yet. I wanted to understand the full scope of what had happened, and I had a feeling there was more to discover. The next Morrison Scholarship Committee meeting was in April. This time, we were interviewing the final candidates for that year's scholarship. It was déjà vu in the best possible way. I got to sit on the other side of the process I'd been cheated out of 20 years earlier. The students were impressive, bright, articulate, passionate about their futures. Everything I had been at 17, everything Jake had never been. After the interviews, Doctor Morrison pulled me aside. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you might have a personal connection to our scholarship program. She was a bit vague about the details, but she seemed to think it was important for me to hear your story. I looked across the room at Mrs. Patterson, who was pretending to organize papers, but clearly listening to our conversation. She gave me a small nod of encouragement. Doctor Morrison? I was supposed to be a Morrison Scholar myself 20 years ago, but my application was misdirected. The scholarship went to someone else instead. Misdirected? That's an interesting way to put it. I told him the whole story. Not the emotional parts about family betrayal and broken dreams, but the facts. The stolen application, the forged documents, the fraud that had allowed an unqualified candidate to receive the scholarship. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. And this other recipient, what happened to him? According to the Foundation's own records, he dropped out after 3 years and never graduated. But he's been claiming to be a college graduate ever since, using that false credential to operate a consulting business. Do you have documentation of these claims? I have screenshots of his social media profiles, his business website, and his LinkedIn account, all claiming a degree from State University that he never earned. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, Sarah, what you're describing is serious fraud, both 20 years ago and now. If what you're telling me is accurate, this person has not only stolen a scholarship that should have gone to a qualified candidate, but he's also been misrepresenting his credentials for business purposes. Both of those are potentially criminal matters. I know. What do you want to do about it? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want to do about it? For 20 years, I'd carried the pain of my family's betrayal. I'd built a successful life despite their sabotage, but I'd never forgotten what they'd cost me. Not just the money, though $40,000 a year would have made a huge difference, but the principle of it. They'd stolen my dreams and given them to someone who didn't deserve them, couldn't appreciate them, and ultimately wasted them. And they'd been lying about it ever since. I want to report it, I said. All of it. The original fraud and the ongoing degree misrepresentation. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. The Foundation will support you completely. What was done to you was unconscionable, and what's being done now is illegal. Let me make some calls. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, investigators, and official statements. The Morrison Foundation took the fraud very seriously, not just because of what had happened to me, but because it called into question the integrity of their entire selection process. They hired a private investigator to document Jake's ongoing degree fraud and build a case for prosecution. They also launched an internal investigation into how the original fraud had been possible, which revealed some uncomfortable truths about the influence my father had wielded as a school principal. In the meantime, I had to decide whether to tell my parents what was coming. I chose not to warn them. After what they'd done to me, they didn't deserve a heads up. Let them find out the same way I'd found out about Jake's scholarship, as a complete and devastating surprise. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. The private investigator was able to confirm that Jake had been misrepresenting his credentials to at least 12 different clients over the past 5 years, resulting in over $200,000 in fraudulent consulting fees. More damaging for my parents, the investigation also revealed that Dad had used his position as principal to manipulate the scholarship process, not just for Jake, but potentially for other students over the years. The school district launched their own investigation and found evidence of grade manipulation, college recommendation irregularities, and other ethical violations. 3 months after I'd first opened Jake's file, everything came crashing down. Jake was arrested at his house on a Tuesday morning, charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, and identity theft. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. Local business owner arrested for degree fraud. The same day, my parents were placed on administrative leave pending the results of the school district's investigation. I found out about Jake's arrest the same way everyone else did, from the newspaper article that someone shared on Facebook. Seeing his mugshot, reading about his fraudulent business activities, knowing that he was finally facing consequences for his actions. It was surreal, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Mostly, I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my family had made choices that led to this moment. Sad that relationships that should have been built on love and support had been destroyed by favoritism and dishonesty. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First my mother, then my father, then relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages were predictable. Mom crying, asking how I could do this to my own brother. Dad demanding that I fix this mess, insisting that Jake had made mistakes but didn't deserve to go to prison. Aunts and uncles who'd never bothered to stay in touch, suddenly very concerned about family loyalty and forgiveness. I didn't return any of the calls. A week later, there was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents standing in the hallway, looking older and more worn down than I remembered. I almost didn't answer, but after 20 years of avoided conversations and unresolved anger, maybe it was time to finally have it out. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Sarah," Mom said, and I could see she'd been crying. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do." "Please," Dad said. "Jake is in jail. They're saying he might go to prison for years. And we might lose our jobs, our pensions, everything we've worked for. Surely we can work this out." "Work what out?" "Jake committed fraud. You committed fraud. Actions have consequences." "It wasn't fraud," Dad said, getting that defensive tone I remembered from childhood. "We were trying to help our son. Jake needed that scholarship more than you did." "Jake needed it more?" I felt that familiar anger rising. Jake, who had a 2.8 GPA and had never worked for anything in his life, needed it more than me? "You were always going to be fine," Mom said. "We knew you'd find a way to succeed no matter what. But Jake, we were worried about him." "So you decided to destroy my future to save his?" "We didn't destroy anything. You went to college anyway. You have a successful career. Everything worked out fine." "Everything worked out fine?" I stared at her. "Mom, I took on $60,000 in student loans because of what you did. I worked 20-hour weeks throughout college just to survive. I couldn't afford to come home for holidays because I needed to work. I built my entire career knowing that I couldn't count on my family for anything. Ever. But you succeeded. Despite you. Not because of you. And Jake? The son you were so worried about? He dropped out of college and has been lying about having a degree for 15 years. He's been committing fraud and stealing money from small business owners. How exactly did your plan work out?" They were both quiet for a moment. Then Dad tried a different approach. "Sarah, we know we made mistakes, but Jake is still your brother, and we're still your parents. Doesn't that count for something? You stopped being my parents the day you chose Jake's convenience over my dreams. And Jake stopped being my brother when he took what was mine and pretended he'd earned it. We can fix this," Mom said desperately. "The lawyers say if you withdraw your complaint, if you say it was all a misunderstanding—" "No. Sarah, please. He's your brother. He has a family now, kids. Do you really want to destroy their lives over something that happened 20 years ago?" "I'm not destroying anything. I'm finally telling the truth about something that should have been exposed 20 years ago. Jake made the choice to build his life on a lie. You made the choice to help him do it. Now you all get to live with the consequences." Dad's face was getting red, the way it used to when I was a kid, and he thought I was being disrespectful. "You always were selfish, you know that? Always thought you were better than the rest of us." "Better than you?" "No, Dad. I just expected better from you." After they left, I sat in my apartment thinking about family loyalty and forgiveness, and whether I was doing the right thing. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about not trying to help Jake, about not caring more about my parents' careers.